John Gotti of the United States, was born on the 27th of October in the year 1940 in the Bronx, New York. What made this boy from the Bronx choose a life where loyalty was built on blood and fear? How did a street-level thug transform into the Teflon Don, charming in public, yet merciless in private, untouchable in court, but feared on the streets? And what ultimate price did he pay for ruling a world where betrayal was inevitable? From his earliest days on the rough streets of Brooklyn to the cold steel bars of a prison cell, John Gotti's story is as captivating as it is chilling. His rise through the Gambino crime family wasn't just a tale of ambition. It was a declaration of war on the very system that tried to stop him. John Gotti's real education didn't come from school books. It came from the back alleys of East New York, Brooklyn. His family, poor and struggling, had moved there from the Bronx when he was a boy. The streets of Brooklyn in the 1940s and 50s were a dangerous classroom, and Gotti became a fast learner. By the time he was 12, he had joined a local street gang, learning the Mafia's unspoken rules, loyalty, silence, and power through fear. One defining moment of his early life occurred when he tried to steal equipment from a construction site. The act ended badly. He dropped a piece of machinery on his foot, causing a permanent limp. But setbacks never stopped John Gotti. Instead, they seemed to sharpen him. He soon aligned himself with Carmine Fatico, a local capo in the Gambino family, who saw potential in the tough and fearless teenager. Under Fatico's watch, Gotti graduated from petty theft to hijacking trucks at John F. Kennedy Airport, a major income source for the mob. Throughout his youth, Gotti was arrested multiple times, but he was always back on the streets in no time. His fearlessness and reliability didn't go unnoticed. By his early 20s, he had already built a reputation as someone who got things done without hesitation and without mercy. This rising star of the underworld was now on a direct path to becoming a made man. Brooklyn wasn't just where Gotti grew up. It was where he learned how to survive, intimidate, and control. By the early 1970s, John Gotti's reputation within the Gambino crime family was growing rapidly. He had become one of Carmine Fatico's most trusted enforcers, known for his quick action and unwavering loyalty. Gotti's skill in hijackings, loan sharking, and intimidation had earned him the attention of higher-ups within the family. But it was his involvement in violence, planned and purposeful, that truly set him apart from the average street-level thug. In 1973, Gotti's name was tied to a major turning point in his career, the murder of James McBratney, a man suspected of kidnapping and killing Mafia members. Gotti, under orders, carried out the hit in a Staten Island bar. Though he was later arrested, the act had already proven his readiness for the big leagues. While awaiting trial, Gotti was careful, never revealing any information, further earning him respect. He served a short prison sentence after taking a plea deal, but when he came out, he was rewarded. By 1977, he had officially become a made man in the Gambino family, a formal induction that marked him as a lifelong member of the Mafia. Shortly afterward, he was promoted to capo or captain and given control of a crew that operated mainly out of Queens. Gotti's rise wasn't just about violence, it was about knowing when to speak, when to act, and when to stay silent. His charm helped him build alliances, but his fists and fear secured his place. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a rising commander in one of America's most powerful criminal empires. As John Gotti moved deeper into the ranks of the Gambino crime family, his leadership style became unmistakably clear, fast, brutal, and absolute. He ruled his crew with an iron grip, and those who crossed him rarely got a second chance. The streets feared him, not just because of his reputation, but because of the quiet understanding that when Gotti gave an order, it was carried out without delay and without mercy. He expanded his operations, branching out from hijackings and loan sharking into illegal gambling, extortion, and union racketeering. Under his leadership, the crew's earnings surged. He demanded discipline, loyalty, and results. When there were whispers of betrayal, Gotti responded with swift violence. The bloodshed wasn't senseless, it was calculated. He believed that fear maintained order better than loyalty alone. Internally, Gotti began to clash with other captains, particularly over profits and influence. He felt the family's boss, Paul Castellano, was becoming too greedy, too distant, and too focused on white-collar crimes while neglecting the street soldiers who did the dirty work. Gotti, a man of the streets, saw himself as the true protector of Mafia tradition, where power came from muscle, not money alone. At the same time, Gotti's public image was growing. Police were watching him more closely, and so were the FBI. Yet he moved with confidence, often dining in public, dressed in expensive suits, flashing smiles while knowing full well that bodies were dropping behind the scenes. This phase of Gotti's life marked the perfect storm, his thirst for power met with a willingness to spill blood to keep it. By the mid-1980s, John Gotti wasn't just feared, he was famous. While other Mafia leaders preferred shadows, Gotti stepped into the spotlight. Always immaculately dressed in tailored suits and silk ties, he became a tabloid sensation. Reporters called him the Dapper Don, a nickname that reflected his style, charm, and boldness. Unlike past mob bosses who hid behind layers of secrecy, Gotti seemed to embrace attention. He regularly appeared outside his social club in Ozone Park, Queens, flashing smiles and waving to onlookers. He dined at high-end restaurants, gave off-the-cuff remarks to journalists, and even strutted into courtrooms like a celebrity. This public bravado was unheard of in Mafia circles. Gotti became a symbol of Mafia glamour, dangerous, yes, but also magnetic. Many people in New York, especially in his old neighborhoods, admired him. To some, he was a modern-day outlaw hero who had beaten the system. But this public persona wasn't just vanity, it was strategy. By making himself a figure of fascination, he distracted from the bloodier business happening behind the scenes. His crew continued their criminal operations, and Gotti ensured that loyalty remained absolute. Meanwhile, the FBI grew more determined. His fame had brought more cameras, more informants, and more pressure. Still, in the eyes of many, Gotti couldn't be touched. He had beaten multiple charges in court. Jurors seemed reluctant to convict him, and prosecutors were left frustrated. Each acquittal only added to his legend. The line between Mafia boss and media star was blurring, and John Gotti was loving every minute of it. By late 1985, tensions within the Gambino crime family had reached a boiling point. At the center of it all stood John Gotti, frustrated, ambitious, and watching as his boss, Paul Castellano, drifted further from the street-level values that Gotti cherished. Castellano preferred business suits to street meetings, and he focused heavily on white-collar crimes, distancing himself from the soldiers who kept the family running. Gotti viewed him as arrogant, greedy, and out of touch with the Mafia's traditional code. The final straw came when Castellano failed to attend the funeral of Aniello Delacroce, the family's underboss and Gotti's mentor. This act was seen as a deep insult to Gotti and others loyal to Delacroce. Behind closed doors, Gotti began planning a bold move, a coup that would shock the criminal underworld. On the evening of December 16, 1985, Castellano and his driver, Thomas Bilotti, were ambushed outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. Gunmen opened fire in broad daylight, leaving both men dead on the sidewalk. Though the assassins were masked and quick, suspicion immediately turned toward Gotti. It was an unprecedented hit, killing a sitting mafia boss without approval from the Commission, the governing body of organized crime. But Gotti had calculated the risk. By eliminating Castellano, he not only removed a rival, but also sent a message of power and fear across all 5 families. It was a turning point in Mafia history. Within days, Gotti solidified his position as boss of the Gambino family. He had defied tradition, broken the rules, and come out on top. But with that bold act came new enemies and new eyes watching his every move. With Paul Castellano dead, John Gotti wasted no time in claiming leadership of the Gambino crime family. His takeover was swift and unapologetic. By early 1986, Gotti was the undisputed boss of the most powerful mafia family in America. But unlike his predecessors, who preferred secrecy and shadows, Gotti ruled with flair, confidence, and a carefully crafted image. His base of operations remained the Rave Night social club in Little Italy, where he often held meetings in full view of the public. He became a familiar sight in the neighborhood, laughing with associates, always dressed in impeccable suits. Surveillance teams from the FBI constantly filmed his comings and goings, but Gotti never flinched. He acted as if he were untouchable, and for a time he was. Under his leadership, the Gambino family thrived. Gotti tightened control over unions, construction rackets, extortion networks, and gambling rings. He promoted loyalists to key positions and rewarded silence with wealth. Anyone suspected of betrayal faced swift and often deadly consequences. Yet, among his men, Gotti commanded fierce respect. To them, he was bold, decisive, and loyal to those who served him well. But Gotti's reign came with a cost. His high visibility made him a prime target for law enforcement. Prosecutors grew increasingly aggressive, while surveillance operations became more sophisticated. The FBI bugged phones, tracked meetings, and placed listening devices even inside the Rave Night club. Still, Gotti remained defiant. In the public's eyes, he was a larger-than-life figure, stylish, fearless, and constantly one step ahead. His rule was marked by both prosperity and paranoia. The Mafia had never seen a boss like him, and neither had the courts that would soon try to bring him down. John Gotti's time as boss was not without its legal troubles. In fact, his high-profile status made him a constant target of law enforcement. Between 1986 and 1990, Gotti faced multiple indictments for crimes ranging from racketeering to assault. But every time he stepped into a courtroom, he walked out a free man. The media dubbed him the Teflon Don because no charge seemed to stick. His trials became public spectacles. Crowds gathered outside courthouses, eager to catch a glimpse of the sharply dressed mob boss. Reporters swarmed him for comments, and Gotti, never camera-shy, offered witty one-liners and confident smirks. For many, especially in working-class New York neighborhoods, he became a folk hero, a man who challenged the government and walked away untouched. But his courtroom victories weren't based solely on charisma. Behind the scenes, Gotti's legal team used every tactic possible. Witnesses were intimidated or paid off. Jurors were sometimes bribed or scared into silence. Prosecutors knew what was happening but couldn't always prove it. Each acquittal only strengthened Gotti's legend, frustrating law enforcement and emboldening his supporters. Yet, with each trial, the FBI net grew tighter. Investigators were learning from their mistakes, adapting their methods, and searching for weak links in Gotti's armor. The public may have cheered his victories, but inside FBI offices, plans were already underway to bring him down for good. For Gotti, these years were the height of his fame. He had defied justice time and again, basking in the spotlight, but the illusion of invincibility wouldn't last forever. His next trial would be unlike any before, and this time the government was preparing its most powerful weapon yet, betrayal from within. The turning point in John Gotti's empire came not from bullets or courtroom battles, but from the betrayal of his closest ally, Sammy the Bull Gravano. As Gotti's underboss, Gravano had been by his side through years of criminal operations, violence, and triumphs. He was considered one of the most loyal and feared men in the Gambino family. But that loyalty would shatter under the weight of legal pressure and secret recordings. In the early 1990s, the FBI had successfully bugged the apartment above the Rave Night social club. Over time, they recorded hours of Gotti speaking openly about murders, associates, and internal Mafia affairs. But the real blow came when Gravano was arrested alongside Gotti and presented with the damning evidence. Prosecutors made him an offer: testify against Gotti in exchange for a lighter sentence. At first, it seemed impossible. A made man turning on the boss. But after listening to tapes where Gotti blamed him for various crimes and hinted at eliminating him if necessary, Gravano made his decision. In a shocking move, he flipped, becoming the highest-ranking member of the American Mafia ever to testify against a sitting boss. Gravano's testimony was explosive. He confessed to personally participating in 19 murders and laid bare the inner workings of the Gambino family. He painted Gotti not just as a leader, but as the mastermind behind countless crimes. For Gotti, it was the ultimate betrayal. The man he had trusted most had now become the government's star witness. The mob's code of silence, omerta, had been broken at the highest level. And with it, the very foundation of Gotti's untouchable image began to crumble. In 1992, John Gotti stood trial for the last time. This time, there were no smiling crowds or confident exits from the courtroom. The stakes were higher, the evidence overwhelming, and the betrayal by Sammy Gravano had turned the tide. Gotti faced multiple charges: murder, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and more. But unlike past trials, the prosecution now had eyewitness testimony from inside the Mafia's inner circle, backed by hours of FBI recordings. The courtroom was tense. Gravano detailed Gotti's involvement in murders, extortion, and illegal dealing. The tapes were played aloud, Gotti's voice discussing hits and condemning associates. The man who once mocked the system was now exposed by his own words. Jurors watched, the public listened, and Gotti's once untouchable image began to shatter. On April 2nd, 1992, the verdict was announced. John Gotti was found guilty on all counts. The sentence was swift and final: life in prison without the possibility of parole. The Teflon Don had finally met justice. He was sent to the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, a high-security prison designed for the most dangerous inmates. Isolated and monitored, Gotti was no longer the man in control. His reign was over, and the streets of New York began adjusting to life without his iron grip. For the government, it was a monumental victory. They had taken down the most public and powerful mob boss in decades. For Gotti's supporters, it was a tragedy, a fall from grace for a man who once seemed larger than life. And for the American Mafia, it marked the beginning of the end for the old ways of power and silence. John Gotti's final chapter unfolded far from the flashing cameras and crowded sidewalks of New York. Locked inside the solitary walls of the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, he spent 23 hours a day in his cell. The man who once commanded fear and loyalty now lived in silence and isolation. Gone were the sharp suits, the restaurant dinners, and the social club meetings, replaced by concrete, cold steel, and time. Despite being behind bars, Gotti tried to maintain some influence over the Gambino family. He passed messages through visitors and coded letters, attempting to guide decisions from afar. But with each passing year, his grip weakened. The world outside was changing. Law enforcement had cracked down hard on organized crime, and younger, more cautious leaders were emerging. In the late 1990s, Gotti's health began to fail. He was diagnosed with throat cancer and underwent surgery in prison. But the cancer returned aggressively. In 2000, he was transferred to a federal prison hospital in Missouri. There, his condition worsened. No longer the powerful figure who strutted down city sidewalks, Gotti became a frail man battling a disease that didn't care about reputation. On June 10, 2002, John Gotti died at the age of 61. His funeral was heavily watched by law enforcement, and though some loyal followers mourned, the Mafia world had already begun to move on. His death marked the end of an era, one defined by boldness, blood, and the blurred line between crime and celebrity. Gotti's name would live on, but so would the consequences of his choices, both for his family and for the mob he once ruled. John Gotti's legacy is one of striking contrasts, celebrated by some, feared by many, and studied by all who seek to understand the modern American underworld. Even after his death in 2002, his name continues to spark fascination. To the public, he remains one of the most recognizable mobsters in history, a man who wore designer suits, smiled for cameras, and openly challenged the justice system. To law enforcement, he was the embodiment of organized crime's boldest era. His rise and fall became a symbol of how far the American Mafia had come and how far it could fall. Gotti's audacity redefined what it meant to be a mob boss. He turned crime into performance, blending real violence with calculated public image. But his thirst for visibility came at a price. The attention he craved eventually gave investigators the tools they needed to destroy his empire. Culturally, Gotti inspired books, films, and documentaries. His life was dramatized as both cautionary tale and myth. In his old neighborhoods, stories of his generosity and toughness still circulate. Yet behind those stories are countless victims, ruined families, and a legacy of lawlessness that scarred communities. Within the Mafia, his name is both revered and resented. He broke rules, disobeyed tradition, and attracted heat that burned the entire organization. But he also led with clarity, loyalty, and charisma, qualities that made him unforgettable. In the end, John Gotti didn't just lead a crime family, he became a symbol of what happens when ego, ambition, and violence collide. His story serves as a reminder that power, no matter how grand, always carries a price. Thank you very much for watching.